Welcome to an extraordinary edition of Rebellion's educational series. We're here with iconic astronaut Rhea Seddon, one of the first females in space, an inspiration to me, an inspiration to many other astronauts I know, referred to as a national treasure and as a hero. It's my pleasure to introduce astronaut Seddon. Today, I'd like to ask you, how was it being in the first female class? Was it tough? Did you feel you were treated equally to the males?
I think we were treated well, in some ways kind of not equal, but we were treated very well. It was an exciting time. The women had to sort of find their path, their strengths, and we really had to learn how to fit in. None of us wanted to be ostracized or set aside. And so we had some learning to do. All of us tried to work really, really hard. I think when women are the first in anything, they have to work extra hard to prove themselves. And I think we did that. We didn't ask any special favors or things like that. If there were things that had to be done, uh, learning things or physical things, we tried our best to be able to do them and do them well. So it was. It was some
Trial, a trial by water is what you have been said.
yes. One of the hardest things for me early on in our astronaut training was that we had to become scuba certified because when astronauts train for spacewalks, they do it in a large water tank with a spacewalk suit on. And if the helmet floods for some reason, they have safety divers that will come over and give you a scuba mouthpiece. So you have to be comfortable with that. So that was difficult for me because I wasn't a good swimmer. But you had to go through all the scuba stuff as though you were going to be certified to be a scuba diver. But that entailed swimming the length of the recreation center's pool underwater. You had to be able to go down to the bottom of the pool and pick up a brick and carry it up to the surface. You had to tread water for 20 minutes. All of that was really difficult for me, and I thought I was going to fail and not be in the astronaut program anymore.
How many
But
times were you dropped from a helicopter?
we did go through water survival training, and probably a couple of times we were dropped in the water out on Biscayne Bay in Florida. But that was pretty easy because all you had to do was inflate your life preservers and float.
Well, what
You
was
got
the
dragged.
hardest part of being an astronaut for 20 years, in your opinion?
I think that was one of the hardest things was the physical part of things because I was
Mm.
the smallest person that they had ever taken, and I don't think NASA was really um, ready for somebody that was my size, and I had to learn um, different ways of dealing with that. Had to do things differently sometimes um, because I was so small.
Well, speaking of fear, you wrote this fantastic book, Go for Orbit, and I really just loved reading it the other night while listening to my Andrea Bocelli. And there was one line that just struck me where you said, quote, "We were in a thin protective cocoon in the midst of a fireball as hot as the surface of the sun." I mean, how terrifying was reentry for you?
Um, I think it was pretty terrifying. The launch itself is lots of noise and vibration and some G forces and things like that. But then when you re-enter the atmosphere and go through all the air molecules, it heats up outside. So it really does feel like you're flying in the middle of a fireball, and you're aware of the fact that there's not much protecting you from the outside of uh, the outside, and that if there's a hole somewhere or there's a breach somewhere or something bad happens. But I guess I always sort of felt like whatever happened on launch or entry, it was going to be catastrophic and it would all be over.
But
So
did you feel confident in the space shuttle?
I did. I did. I didn't fly early in the program, so got to watch my husband fly, got to see my friends fly, and we gained confidence in
Our
the
audience should know, by
shuttle.
the way, that your husband is another legendary astronaut,
Yes, yes.
Gibson, who's you know,
Probably
ab-
more legendary than I am, but he was a great astronaut. He became head of the astronaut office at one point in time. Um, his background is aviation and engineering, and he was a perfect fit for
I have a
NASA.
7-year-old daughter, and upon watching you this morning, she started talking about space. So I wonder how many people you have and will inspire with your work. So I think you should take tremendous pride in that, astronaut. Um,
Thank you.
I,
And that's one of the things you sign up for when you become an astronaut.
I
You have to be able to go out and share your story and inspire younger people and tell them, that it going can be tough, but you have to keep going and you will accomplish the things you wish to accomplish.
Well, what's so amazing about your career and remarkable and inspiring is the fact that you have saved lives and inspired others. You were an emergency room doctor for
Hmm.
years. That's, to have done both that and to walk in space. I mean, you've really done the two most remarkable things that this, in my opinion, you can do as a human being.
Well, they were both things that I really, really wanted to do. I didn't ever think I'd become an astronaut, so I set the goal of becoming a surgeon and had to work really hard at that and thought that that's what I would be doing with my life until they opened the astronaut program for women. So the timing was perfect for me, and it led me to a totally different life, but one that was pretty amazing. I met my husband through NASA, and we were blessed with some astrotots, some children born to astronauts, and so I felt like I had really had a very full life.
Absolutely wonderful. You also said previously that the Challenger explosion was the one time you had really thought about leaving NASA. How long did it take you to come back from that?
Well, when you dedicate your life to something like the astronaut program, um, you have to think about things like that. I mean, I had young children and I had to worry about, my own mortality, but
Mm.
I had been assigned to a second flight and had been training for that. And that was my dream flight. It was all about life sciences and studying adaptation to weightlessness. And that was the flight that I really wanted to make. I made a first flight and launched satellites, but,
You performed surgery in space. I mean, albeit on rats, but you were the first
yes,
person to perform surgery on space, and so that's also
exactly.
another remarkable first that you have.
Absolutely.
Do you think
Well,
it'll be easy to provide healthcare on Mars, or do you have an opinion on that?
not easy, but
No.
it's something we have to learn how to do. I think that if we go to the moon and find out what a moon colony is like and how much better things are in 1/7, in 1/3 G, I guess, but you'll
Mm.
have some G forces on the moon, and you'll learn to live with partial gravity, and that will give us a lot of information about what it's going to be like when we go to Mars. So, I think that that's a wonderful goal, and I think that we'll learn a lot from the moon habitat, and then we'll be able to know better what we're going to be up against when we get to Mars.
Do you want to go back into space one day?
I don't know. you know, uh, I suppose if they asked me and I had a particular reason, um, that, I might, but I don't know. I think that the younger people ought to have a chance now, and I'll just watch them and cheer them on.
I have a question. On your first space shuttle launch, was the initial feeling, was that kind of your most exciting time when launch occurred on the first time? Was that kind of the peak early on?
Yeah, you train a long time for a flight. And my flights, some of them were delayed, and it's kind of a downer when you go out and strap in and get ready, and everybody's watching, and for some reason you don't launch that day. It's difficult, but you know once you feel the boosters ignite, you're on your way. All the training is, it was worth it, and it was always very exciting when that happened. But I think on my first one, I was just finally excited to get to go, because you're not a real astronaut until you've flown in space. So I knew, when we passed 50 miles up, that I was going to get my astronaut wings. So that's pretty exciting.
So how different was it by your 700th hour up in space,
By
mentally,
my what?
physically? So you spent over 700 hours in space. And so how different was it physically, mentally for you by the 700th hour?
Well, it just sort of felt like I had hit my stride. I had I had learned how to deal with weightlessness. I knew what it was going to be like. My second and third flights, of course, were life sciences, and my second flight was all about human adaptation, and my third flight was very much like it. My third flight, I was the payload commander, and so was kind of the leader in getting everything done the way we wanted, and that was a real feeling of success. That flight to me was perfect. We brought back all the information. We did the rat dissections that we had trained and trained and trained for, and that all went well. When the wheels stop on the runway and you're home, I mean, it's just this great relief and exuberance, especially when the flight went well, and we knew we had done a great job. And I think that was one of the most um, wonderful things in my life, is when we rolled to a stop on my third flight, and I thought, we did it, we did it, we did everything we were supposed to do and more. And I was very proud of that flight.
John Young said greatest feeling he ever had was when he rolled to his first stop from his first mission.
Yep.
You did these experiments in space. I mean, how prepared were you in case one of them had gone awry? I mean, I saw one of the other astronauts, looked like he could get, very sick from getting so dizzy. I mean, what did you have in space to, kind of help him? Obviously, there was no real, medevac available when you're up in orbit.
Well, we had planned for all kinds of contingencies. It became evident early on in this shuttle program that we had quite a bit more room to move around than they did on the Apollo flights. And with moving around, a lot of people got disoriented and motion sick. And at first, it was just kind of like you had to tough it out. And then we found a medication that could be given with a shot that took care of that. So people were felt a whole lot better about it. But we did have, on board we had a medical equipment set that we could do things for people, some pills, some shots, um, some things like that. And every flight had two people that were trained as crew medical officers. I didn't have to have a whole lot of training because I was already a doctor. But for instance, my husband always volunteered to be the crew medical officer on his flights, and he had to learn a little bit about putting stitches in and pulling teeth and giving shots. And so we had, as we went along, we learned what we were going to need to do and what we needed to have on board to take care of anything that we might run across when we were there.
I mean, what type of emergency plan did you have if things went awry? How quickly could you get back, conceivably to the desert for landing?
Well, we always had plans. The shuttle had a number of what we called abort modes, meaning, if you lost an engine, you could get to Africa. If you lost an engine later on, you might make it to Australia. And so we usually had, a way to get back to Earth if we needed to. Obviously, we learned from the Challenger and the Columbia accidents that there were certain failure modes that were not survivable.
But like in a
But
fire drill, how quickly could you get from emergency to, you think on the ground? Like 90 minutes, 45 minutes? I was curious about that.
Something like that.
Uh,
I've kind of forgotten the timing, but you could
uh,
get to Africa if you needed to in 35 minutes.
okay,
And then
wonderful.
think about landing in Africa somewhere. But we had to have our shots for Africa, about yellow fever and I've forgotten what, but it was kind of silly to think that we were going to land there. But um, we had ways to get back down to the ground in certain instances. You couldn't just fly to an airport. There were certain landing sites, and you had to be within range of those.
Was there an Apollo astronaut that ever inspired you or that mentored you or you're friends with at all?
Oh gosh, Alan Bean. Alan Bean had flown in space, flew on, walked on the moon. Just a terrific hero that I knew about. And then he took on the task of being our trainer for our 1978 class. We called ourselves the 35 new guys, even though 6 of us weren't guys. But he took on this task kind of as a senior person who'd, finished his flying days. He took on the task of being our trainer and he arranged everything. He taught us so much. He was just quite an inspiration, and especially to me. I got to know him personally. Our group traveled all over the country, and I happened to sit next to him on the plane one time, and I asked him, "What, you've done so many things. What do you want to do next?" And he said, "I'm going to be an artist," which I thought was kind of strange, but he turned out to be a wonderful artist. But he became a close friend, and I think that's the person that I got closest to. Of course, every time I flew, there was an older astronaut who was the commander, and sometimes not older but than me, but they were all people that I got to know really well. Got to know their families, their spouses. If you train together, your family does social things together. Um, so there were a lot of people along the way. I just remember Alan as one of the most inspirational senior astronauts that I ever got to know.
Yeah, I know your families were all very close, and uh, obviously that reminds me again of astronaut Mike Mullane, for instance, who's extremely close with astronaut Resnick, and so he hit tremendously. Did
Hmm.
you work with the families after that? After Challenger, did you spend time with them? I feel
Um, Not really. I think we all tried to support them in any way that we could.
yeah.
Um, they had a whole cadre of people that were there to make sure that everything was taken care of. The astronaut office had assigned astronauts to each of the crew members, and we did that even after Challenger. You made sure that there was somebody on the ground that would help take care of your family.
Oh,
So,
I didn't know that. No,
mhm.
very interesting. So when you
Yep.
went up, there was someone who would talk, who would
Mhm.
work with your family.
Mhm.
Oh, very interesting.
Exactly.
Did you become friends with that astronaut? Did you guys kind of
Oh,
bond? Or
gosh, yes.
okay,
If you know that you've got to sit down and ask somebody where their will is and what they wanted
gotcha.
to do about being buried, and you got really close to people, and it was one of those things that it was a way of giving back to help the others along the way. But um, that was a good thing. That was part of I think, our astronaut support plan. When we originally were flying, no one considered what the families were going through. Initially, we all had to take care of our own plans to get um, to the launch site, our family plans, and everybody had to make their own personal airline reservations, hotel reservations. And we learned after Challenger that everything was totally disorganized. Uh, Nobody knew where the families were staying, how to get them checked out of their hotels, get them back to Houston. That was a
Yeah.
big step for the astronaut program. Pinky Nelson put that together and ran it through all the hoops that he had to make all of that happen. Get the NASA planes to take people back. Make sure everybody um, was in the same hotel. We had 2 astronauts for each flight that were the family support people, and they, made sure everybody's luggage got to the right place, then got back to Houston if it needed to. So, along the way, we learned how to do it better and better.
Well, Did you have the right privacy when you were on board the space shuttle as a female? Did you feel comfortable
Oh
during the
yeah.
flights? Okay.
We had a
Uh,
bathroom up there and we had a door that you could pull closed. So, and, I slept in the airlock. So you just sort of made your own little place. And, some people were totally open about changing clothes in the middle of the middeck. And that's
oh,
fine.
well, I mean, you're a Berkeley alumnus, so obviously it's nothing you hadn't seen before. I,
I'm a doctor.
yeah, a doctor and a Berkeley alumnus. So I loved when
Right.
you talked about the Forrest Gump scene where you're like, oh, well, that happened. Yeah, no, Berkeley must have been quite
Mhm.
the place. So
It was.
no, we love Berkeley, actually. One of our Rebellion's board members is Dean Kreitzman. So,
Mhm.
and I guess my last question is, what would you say to the 7-year-olds, the 10-year-olds, and even the 15-year-olds who want to become astronauts out there?
Well, I tell them all that you have to dream big is
Yeah.
what I always did. And there were a lot of times that I thought I wasn't going to be able to do what I wanted to do, but I found a way to do something a little bit different or improve my chances. And sometimes it's just luck, but most of the time it's hard work. I never would have become an astronaut if I hadn't gone to medical school and done a residency and spent years and years of preparatory work. So I tell young people to dream big and work hard, because that's going to get you to where you want to go. And if one plan doesn't work out, try something else. But it's part of life. And if you want to do great things, you have to get ready for them.
Well, I would recommend they buy Go for Orbit on Amazon. The link will be under this article. It's absolutely
Yes,
a fantastic read. I really loved it. As you know,
great.
I found it riveting. You
Yes.
have a kind of an Ernest Hemingway way of talking to the writer in simplistic ways about kind of very large issues, and so
Well,
I
that's what the
really
book is. But
uh,
it's difficult to find it on Amazon, but they can find it on my website, www.rheaseddon.com. And
well,
I
that'll be
offer
there as well.
autograph books through that, but that's the best way to get it. But it's not a deep literary tome. It's just a simple story of a young woman that became an astronaut and had a wonderful life.
Well, the right stuff was a simple story. Also, happened to inspire generations of people. So I argue this is really just an absolutely excellent read, and it should be next to on your reading list. Astronaut, the absolute honor of my life to be able to converse with you today, and please stay safe and thank you for giving us the time.
You too, Alexander. You've done quite well. Thank you for all the good questions.
Oh, pleasure was all mine.